Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Deborah Freeman, and on behalf of LaRouche PAC, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's event. Certainly there is no moment more dramatic for our nation and, in fact, for the world than this one. And it is indeed fitting that after the stunning defeat of the bailout package, if you will, by the House of Representatives just a couple of days ago, that we would be hosting this event today. It is my understanding that we have the largest audience gathered around the world that we have ever had. That doesn't surprise me, but I don't want to keep them waiting. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in welcoming the statesman and economist, Lyndon LaRouche.
Thank you. We have come into times like those you have never in your lifetimes experienced before. As a matter of fact, in history, there's nothing in all modern European history, globally extended, to compare with what is happening globally and in the United States as well right now. There's been nothing like the crisis that faces us today since a comparable crisis in Europe during the medieval period called the New Dark Ages. We are on the verge of a complete collapse of the entire planet into a new dark age. On the 25th of July last year, I announced that we were on the edge of the beginning of a breakdown crisis in the U.S. economy. At that point, I indicated that measures that would have to be taken to deal with this crisis which was going to hit us, measures which, if they had been taken between the 25th of August and recently, we would not be in the crisis we're in today. We're in a crisis today because people like Senator Dodd and Bailout Barney in the House of Representatives prevented the actions which I had specified, which would have prevented the kind of crisis which the nation is and its people are suffering today. So if you don't like what's happening, blame Bailout Barney and Chris Dodd. Chris Dodd's a stooge for Felix Verhoeven, one of the worst right-wingers in our country today. Now, I also indicated proposal for certain other actions, in addition to the warning, which should be taken by the United States to avert and begin the correction of this problem. The first was known as the Householders and Bank Protection Act of 2007, which was specified at that time and was actually set into motion as a formal proposition in early September of that same year. This had much support at the state level and counties throughout the United States. It was voted up by county organizations and state organizations. But it was never formally adopted because of the blocking from interest-controlling people like Dodd and Bailout Barney. So we are in a crisis because Bailout Barney and Dodd and people like them acted to prevent this action occurring, which would have saved our banks, which are now in trouble, and which would have saved the homeowners who are threatened with continuing and accelerating evictions today. This is one of the reasons why the House of Representatives displayed such hatred against the Congress as a whole in the recent vote on Monday against the bailout bill. Now, the bailout bill might be voted up. The danger is that a desperate Bush administration and what it's tied to internationally might try to make a military suppression of resistance to their policy now. They might try to use military force to force through the kind of legislation, the bailout, which is being attempted now. But the other side of this proposition, apart from other measures which I've indicated earlier and will repeat here again today, the essential irony of this situation is that this is no longer the kind of crisis which the lying government we have and the stupid president we have been talking about. This is not a mortgage crisis. This is a collapse and disintegration of the entire international monetary financial system, something that has never happened in European experience before, and for which there's no one competent in the White House right now. We are on the verge of a global hyperinflation like that in October, hit in October of 1923 in Weimar, Germany. When you start talking about 700 billion, then $1 trillion, then $2 trillion, then $3 trillion, then $7 trillion for this bailout, which is the direction we're going in, you're talking about a Weimar-style blowout of the entire international financial monetary system. And what's the problem now is that the bailout method itself is the driving force of hyperinflation, global hyperinflation. And what you have is you have a sense like the French Revolution, in which the Marquis de Lafayette had the correct position politically with the tennis court oath and similar kinds of things. But he lacked one thing. He lacked the guts to take on his own king. The king had been totally corrupted by a number of measures. The king was not too bright. You've got to let him off a little bit. He's kind of stupid. He's good at making clocks and fixing clocks, but he was not very good at politics. And his wife, Marie Antoinette, who was the sister of the Emperor of Austria, was framed up by a British operation called the Queen's Necklace Affair. She was humiliated publicly, and the Emperor of Austria, who had been a friendly fellow, a progressive fellow relative to the rest of his relatives prior to that point, went berserk. So what happened is that the French king, who was a bit of a jerk, brought in foreign, not French troops to occupy the area around Paris, to suppress the French people. And this led to what became, inevitably, the French Revolution, the bloody French Revolution, because of this kind of mistake. We are on the verge of things like that today. You have a situation in which, as you saw with the House of Representatives vote against this bill, despite all the pressure on the representatives, and the pressure was not just on from the representatives, it was from the people who are represented. It's the people out there that hate this. And there's an instinct in this administration to use military force against the people of the United States to suppress the opposition to this bill. That is reality right now. Not something coming down. That is already the reality. If this bill were to be pushed through, even with or without the aid of military force against the American people by American troops, which are now being stationed for this kind of operation, the United States would disappear in very short order. And civilization would crash globally. The world would go into a dark age like that of a similar situation in Europe's 14th century, during which, within a period of a generation, the number of parishes in Europe collapsed by 1/2. the level of population of all Europe collapsed by 1/3.